Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another extremely topical and extremely timely Amet webinar. A story in today's Jerusalem Post quotes Mohammed Pappour, military commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as saying, quote, "If all American leaders are killed, this will still not avenge the blood of Soleimani. We have to follow Soleimani's path and avenge him through other methods." Our Sunni Arab allies have, unfortunately, borne much of the brunt of this revenge. In March, Iranian-backed Houthi rebels attacked airports and oil depots in Zayan and Jeddah. In January of this year, the Houthis have claimed responsibility for a drone attack on Abu Dhabi airport in the UAE, as well as Emirati oil facilities, killing 3 people. We have all seen how last December, Emirati Sheik Tahnoon bin Zayed Al Nahyan paid a visit to Tehran to President Ebrahim Raisi. In March, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia said in an Atlantic interview that he intends to have ongoing talks with Iran. And we have all read reports about how the Saudis have refused to accept phone calls from President Biden. In January, Bahraini Foreign Minister Abdullallatif bin Rashid Al Zayan traveled to China to meet with Foreign Minister Wang Yi. And Saudi Arabia has invited Chinese leader Xi Jinping to visit the kingdom as early as this coming May, and might actually accept the Chinese currency, the yuan, in lieu of US dollars for its sale of oil to China, which will have a mighty impact on our US economy. We all know that our Gulf Arab allies are just as threatened by the Iranian nuclear program, by their Shiite terrorist proxies and the Iranian missile development as the state of Israel is. Yet, because of not only Iran's increasing and growing power within the region, but because of the efforts for a revived nuclear deal with the Islamic Republic by the Biden administration, they are feeling quite vulnerable and perhaps would like to cover all their bases. They call this program diversification. I have to say that perhaps one of my happiest moments of my life was sitting on the White House lawn on September 15th, 2020, when the Abraham Accords were signed by the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and the State of Israel. This is something I wish my parents could have been alive to witness. One of those people, as modest as she is, had a great deal to do with the carefully constructed architecture of these accords. That is our wonderful guest, Victoria Coates. Victoria Coates served as the Deputy National Security Advisor for the Middle East and North Africa on the National Security Staff and the Senior Policy Advisor to the Secretary of Energy in the Donald Trump administration. She had also served as the National Security Advisor in the office of Senator Ted Cruz, where we first met. Victoria now is the director of the Center for Security Policies program on the Middle East and North Africa, which focuses on combating global anti-Semitism, promoting the US-Israel alliance, and combating the threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Victoria holds a BA from Trinity College, an MA from Williams College, and a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, all in art history. She's the author and presenter of dozens of publications and conference papers worldwide on the intersections of art and history, including David Sling, A History of Democracy in 10 works of art. And the forthcoming Seeing the Light, A History of Christianity in 12 works of art. Victoria routinely appears on television and radio outlets such as Fox News, CNN, OANN, Newsmax, The Hewitt Show, The Eric Erickson Show, The John Bachelor Show, and CSP's own Secure Freedom Radio. Her writing has appeared in Bloomberg, Fox News, the Jerusalem Post, the New York Post, Newsweek, the National Interest, National Review, the New Criterion, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Examiner, and the Washington Times. It is indeed a treat and a pleasure to listen to Victoria Coates. Victoria, What is the strength of the Abraham Accords today, and what do the Sunni Arab allies feel right now about their relationship with the United States, as well as about their relationship with the State of Israel?
Well, Sarah, thank you for that very kind introduction and for including me today to be able to share some views with all the wonderful folks that support what you all do every day with Emmett. One quick update: I actually transferred from CSP to the American Foreign Policy Council in January, where I'm now a distinguished fellow in strategic studies. So nothing but love for my former CSP colleagues, but that's my current affiliation. So it's such an important question that you ask, and we have the opportunity now, with a solid year of the Biden administration under our belts, to assess how they are going to manage the legacy from the Trump administration of the Abraham Accords. I obviously was very proud to be with you on that sunny September day 18 months ago to witness the signing of the Accords, and had done preparatory work for the Accords. I was over at the Department of Energy there then, so my role was a supporting one in the final months, but I'll never forget being in Abu Dhabi over the summer of 2020 and knowing, what was going on beneath the surface. And then there was the day that the Chevron deal was announced for the purchase of Noble Energy, which is the Houston-based company that's developing Israel's natural gas resources in the Eastern Mediterranean. And it's funny, more than the August day when they were actually announced, that was the day I knew it was happening, because there's no way Chevron inks that deal absent ironclad assurances from the Gulf, including from Saudi Arabia, that this would not in any way endanger their Gulf business, because they're apples and oranges. There's no comparison, and there's no way an oil major would risk doing business in the Gulf to do business in the Eastern Med. So that, I thought, was a very practical moment of what would be possible going forward in terms of the commerce between Israel and the Gulf states, and then, ideally including the United States. So, we, in my opinion, left the Biden administration with this extraordinary legacy. Unfortunate, and in early days we were hopeful that maybe they would just leave them alone and let them percolate along under their own steam. Unfortunately, we saw over the course of the first year of the Biden administration really overt hostility towards the Gulf. In particular, I would say a more kind of latent, passive hostility toward Israel, and a real distaste for anything in the Middle East due to their intense distaste for anything to have to do with fossil fuels. And so you had the unfortunate spectacle of the President of the United States refusing to speak to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He, of course, had called them a pariah state over the course of the campaign, and then an almost crisis brewing earlier this year, as you documented the Houthi attacks on UAE and Saudi, with the loss of life, the attacks on critical energy infrastructure, and the very muted White House response. And of course, this is the White House that had taken the Houthi off the foreign terrorist organization list a year ago, and which just resulted in Houthi increasing their terrorist activities. And you had this series of escalating statements out of the State Department. Finally, they had to admit that the Houthi were engaging in terrorism. But this was almost a crisis then last month between UAE and the United States. And Barak Ravid just reported that in the meeting that Secretary Blinken had with the Crown Prince of UAE in Morocco last month, Secretary Blinken had to apologize to MBZ for the muted US response. There are so many things wrong with that. I mean, the US response should not have been muted. There should have been nothing to apologize for. There should have been a meeting, a welcome meeting between good friends. But B, the fact that it's now being publicly reported that the US Secretary of State had to apologize to the de facto head of state of another country, I mean, that's just humiliating. And particularly in this context of the radical Biden climate agenda and their shunning of the Gulf because of the fossil fuels issue, now they're realizing how critical those relationships are, and that the United States has a unique role to play now in global energy markets that we did not 10 years ago. And I think this is a critical point to understand the friction between the Saudis and the Emiratis and the United States, because they look at us and they see a fellow producing nation. We should be exporting fuel. And so when prices are high and you want to increase supply, we should coordinate with them, and we would increase as well. And because when you do that and you bring prices down, you make less money. So they're not going to do that on a whim. There has to be a strategy to it, and everybody has to take their share of the burden. But what they're seeing is the Biden administration insisting that we are a consuming nation, and partnering with fellow consumers like Japan and even China earlier in this cycle to do things like release supply from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is a gimmick. It's not going to do anything to actually bring prices down, to include the 10% of ethanol, which is also a gimmick. And so they don't see us taking on our proper role, and it's created terrible frostiness in a relationship that should be very warm. You alluded to again the embarrassment of the Saudis and the Emiratis refusing to take Joe Biden's phone calls. I mean, having been in the Trump White House and staffed a lot of the president's calls with those gentlemen, I can tell you there was never a moment in the Trump administration when the president would not have taken a call from either King Salman or Prince Mohammed. Same thing for UAE, and they obviously were always very eager to get his calls. And so this, in a year, they've taken what was a very warm, productive relationship, culminating in the Abraham Accords, and have created all this strife and friction just when we need those relationships the most. One other point I wanted to make that you alluded to in your introduction is the issue of China, because we always have to see these things through the lens of China. China is Saudi Arabia's single largest customer. As such, they certainly don't want to annoy the communist Chinese. And my point to the Saudis was always, I am fine with you selling them oil. You can sell them oil all day long as you know that, I am your friend of first resort. We are the ones who are backing you up in terms of security and regional issues, but they don't have that sense of security anymore. And so there was the sort of trial balloon that they would potentially transact their deals with China and the yuan. I actually think that is just that, a balloon. It does not do the Saudis any good financially to do that. It actually penalizes them. And I think what they're trying to do is send a signal that if the United States is absent from the stage in the Middle East, that they will look elsewhere. Ultimately, I think the just overwhelming strength of the U.S. economy, which was on full display with the first set of sanctions put on the Russians, particularly the sanction on the Russian central bank, and the promise of additional sanctions. And you saw everybody flee from Russia. And you saw China get real concerned that the stink was going to get on them, and they should remain very concerned about that. And this is a different topic, but I am a very strong proponent of the sweeping energy sanctions that should be put on Russia today. We shouldn't wait. We should put those sanctions on right now and show Xi, President Xi of China, just exactly how strong the US is in this space, because even China can't really compete with that. So I wanted to end my remarks on the good news front. Whenever I show up, usually it means there's been a catastrophe. So I always try to look for good news to share with folks. And I know Hussein will touch on this as well, but the Middle East is changing dramatically, and not always for the worst. And I think a lot of that change is emblemized by the Abraham Accords. And the big question is now what is going to happen with Saudi? And in that Atlantic Council interview, or Atlantic rather, interview that you mentioned, the Crown Prince really did open the door for ongoing discussions with Israel, collaboration with Israel, and eventually normalization with Israel. And I'll tell you, from my time in Saudi in the fall of 2020, when I was doing my Gulf tour, it really was a question of when, not if, normalization would occur. And I think if President Trump had been reelected, that would have happened in the first quarter of 2021. So tragic that it didn't, but major changes in Saudi. And even changes in UAE, which was way ahead in terms of liberalization, but all sorts of restrictions during Ramadan have been lifted. And I wanted to share a photograph, I think, that I emailed you right before the program. I don't know if y'all can put that up.
Naomi, did you get that?
I did email it.
Just a moment.
Okay, thank you so much.
So this is from a trip to Riyadh in February, and I was actually there for Valentine's Day. You know, isn't it romantic? And 5 years ago, if you'd been in Saudi on Valentine's Day and had even just worn red and said nothing, you would have been harassed by the morality police that Valentine's Day was a terrible thing, and, you know, and an affront to Islam. This time we went to a very westernized bistro, men and women sitting together at the same table. The females in our party were in full Western dress. There was fake champagne, but champagne, roses. Everybody said Happy Valentine's Day. And that night we got back to our rooms at the Four Seasons, and this greeted me. I honestly have never been so shocked. Now, there was no alcohol in the room, but these objects would have been considered a horrible affront. You couldn't have had them in Saudi Arabia, let alone put them in a public hotel room. So I asked our Saudi interlocutor the next day, they showed in the picture, I said, what the heck? And he said, oh yeah, you know, we're just trying this out. We want to see if there's a reaction. And I said, well, what has the reaction been? And he said, a lot of people calling the front desk asking where the alcohol is. So again, unimaginable. I would have considered that unimaginable in the fall of 2020. Here we are in the spring of 2022, and this is what's going on. So great changes occurring in Saudi Arabia, huge potential. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that the private sector can continue to strengthen the connectivity between Saudi and Israel, and that the administration just stays out of it as much as possible. And you know, it's a handicap, because having their confidence in the United States can facilitate the process. But what I think would, you know, to just wrap up, speak to the strength of the Abraham Accords is the fact that it is happening. And so strong concerns, of course, wish certain things were different, but overall, I'm actually hopeful.
Wonderful, wonderful. So despite the retreat of the Biden administration from the region, you feel that the overall health of the relationship between Israel and our Gulf Arab allies is relatively positive, right?
It is, and I think the Negev summit that we saw last month was a really strong demonstration of that, and very happy that the Egyptians were there in force, and you know, that was a positive sign. You know, unfortunately, apparently Secretary Blinken was the only one who brought up the Palestinian issue, and everybody else was like, let's not go there. This is about other things. But just the fact that happened, and that they're planning to do it repeatedly is a wonderful sign.
Right, right. So do you think that the damage that is going on between our Sunni Gulf allies and the Biden administration is irreparable if there's a change of administration? Do you think this could all be repaired?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's unfortunate because, you know, it's a lot of hard work that you wish you didn't have to do. But one of my favorite things is, you know, there's a reason there's an AM in Aramco. That's the Arabian American oil company. That just the Saudi petro giant. I mean, this relationship goes back more than 70 years. It is central to both of our nations. I think that we need to look to our political leadership to clarify what that relationship is going forward. As I said, with this new energy posture that the United States should be embracing, there is a whole world of cooperation. We're not a supplicant anymore. We can be a partner. We can be, a collaborator, a force for stability in global markets. And, ultimately, what I would like to do is see OPEC become irrelevant. Why would the Saudis and Emiratis want to be in an organization with the Iranians and the Russians and the Venezuelans? I mean, lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. There's got to be something better, but we have to offer it. I mean, we can't just tell them to, tear down their existing architecture without an alternative. So, as I said, ultimately hopeful, but it's definitely a dicey time.
Getting back to the summit in Sde Boker in the Negev, where Secretary of State Antony Blinken was present. We saw gleeful pictures of them all joining hands. Do you believe that, if push comes to shove and Israel feels that it is forced to wage military attack against Iran, that some of our Sunni Gulf allies will, under the table, lend some sort of support?
I don't know that it would be under the table at this point. I mean, there have been some joint exercises in the Red Sea. There's some other things that are going on. And, if you have a situation where the region, who knows Iran a lot better than we do, because they're right there. I may have told you this, but I took an Israeli friend on his first trip east of the Jordan River last November, and we were sitting in Manama, looking across the Gulf, and he said, "It's right there, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, you can almost see it. It's right there." So for them, this is a very immediate problem. For the United States, it's sort of distant and abstract. So if there is a concurrence amongst, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Israelis that this has reached a tipping point and action has to be taken, I don't know that it would be under the table.
It's about the most welcome news I've heard in a very, very long time. And with that, I would like to turn the podium over to my phenomenal colleague, Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour, quite an expert on these issues himself, who will read the questions that came in and I'm sure pose some of his own. Hussein?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you very much, Victoria, for such a wonderful presentation. I mean, we hear a lot of bad news all the time, so it's actually good to hear some of the good news from somebody who's been there, who actually seen it, who worked on it, who knows what they are telling us. So thank you, and thank you for your great service for the United States and all the people of the Middle East. Really, we've received multiple questions, so I'm going to start actually with the easiest one. People are asking, how can they get your book? Somebody's looking for your book on art history, and they don't know how to find it. Is it on Amazon?
That is the best question you can ever ask an author. And yes, indeed, it is on Amazon. And I just, for this audience, I would say the title David Sling was actually a coincidence. I titled the book before I found out about the missile system, our missile defense system, but it's one of the happiest coincidences in my life. So
amazing. All right.
Thank you for that.
Okay, the first question what we have is about the troubled relationship between, it's not just the Biden administration, it's the entire democratic foreign policy establishment at this point. And it's media arms and analytic arms. They're having now a very troubling relationship with the Saudis. And do you believe that this will form an obstacle, a disincentive, or an incentive for the Saudis to seek a relationship with Israel? Is it a card that they now want to hold closer because of the problems with their main ally? Or is it actually encourages them to seek their own relationship?
Strangely, I think it does both. I think the Saudis understand that this is a major card for them to play with, particularly the United States Congress. Mm-hmm. And if I were advising them right now, I actually would advise them not to do it because this administration, I don't think, would value it or support it the way it should be for it's going to be a huge step for them, obviously.
Right.
So I would recommend that they continue, the quiet behind the scenes cooperation, the opportunity to, attend events together in, UAE, Morocco, and Bahrain, so that, this literally becomes normal. But I would wait until they're going to get the biggest bang for their buck, because as I said, this is a huge step for them, even bigger than the cocktail shaker in Riyadh. And so I think they should have all the credit that will be due to them when they do decide to make the leap.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your answer. We received a question about the religious aspect of this. People ask, well, in order for them to cooperate with Israel, don't they have to violate their own religion? Don't they have to violate their own sacred doctrines? How is this even possible that they would sincerely accept the Jewish state?
I mean, I think that would have been the case, even 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago. But I think the sort of conversion's the wrong word, but the process that Saudi has gone through in terms of becoming much less extreme in terms of its own internal religion, and seeing it up close and personal, being there for a long time in 2020, you can almost feel it happening, that Mecca and Medina are being sort of put in a capsule, and that the very strict traditional Orthodox approach to Islam will be alive and well, as it should be, in those very holy sites. But as you go to Tehran and Jeddah, not to mention Riyadh, there's a real sense of, and I'm sure, I haven't been up to Nahyan yet, but I'm sure that will be that way there as well, that the rest of the country, is becoming increasingly secular and modern, and in that context, much more tolerant. And we have opening, I think, this week, but it's imminent, the Abrahamic Center in Abu Dhabi, which has a mosque, a church, and a temple. And so, that, again, unimaginable. But now that's a major public project, patronized by the Crown Prince at an extremely prominent location right by the gigantic mosque in Abu Dhabi, if you know the city. So, what would have been incomprehensible 5 years ago now is in the realm of the possible.
Thank you. We have questions about the perceived, maybe this perception is wrong, but the perceived hostility towards the Abraham Accords. I mean, this administration came to office and they were not even willing to utter the words. They weren't even willing to say the Abraham Accords. Is there such a hostility? Do you also perceive it, or are we misperceiving? And why? Why does such hostility from people who supposedly spent their life trying to make peace towards peace?
Yeah, there's definitely at least a passive resentment, and I don't know this to be the case, but I have been told there was an official communication from the State Department to the other departments and agencies last February that the words Abraham Accords were verboten. We were to refer to, not we, because I wasn't part of it, but they were to refer to normalization deals, which is, for anyone who works on Middle East issues, kind of a dirty word, because the whole business is that the Palestinians don't like normalization deals. They don't want normalization. So it was definitely a downgrade. What's been interesting is, and I think the reason for that is quite simple. The Biden administration believes very strongly that anything the Trump administration did has to be bad, just inherently. And then you also have the fact that this administration is staffed with a whole bunch of people who built their careers on what turned out to be a false assumption, which is that a deal with the Palestinians had to come before a deal with the Arabs. And that's what drove them. I mean, John Kerry is on the record, he's on film saying, this is the case. So if you have a whole bunch of people who have said for 30 years that this is impossible, and they have just been shown to be wrong, in a way that what they're doing is using this administration to try to stuff the genie back into the bottle. And what's been impressive to me is there are some folks who used to be in that camp who have had the intellectual sophistication and humility to say, we never knew that this was possible, and we should take advantage of it. I think, they're so popular, everybody likes the Accords. So I think they now are recognizing that it's pretty much it's political poison to be overtly hostile to them. So as I said in my remarks, I'm hopeful they'll just leave it alone.
I second that. I definitely hopeful they get out of the way of peace. We've received also more questions about, is it possible or how to undo some of the damage that this administration is doing to our strategic relationships with our Arab allies? And actually, me and Sarah, we do receive this question on Capitol Hill in our meetings on Capitol Hill as well. So in your view, who and how could do anything to mitigate the problems that are created in those relationships?
I think it's vitally important, and Congress is going to be the only game in town, obviously, for the next year and a half. And so a couple of things. I mean, I think the work you do on the Hill, I've started to spend a lot of time up there again as well, to encourage members, to be as supportive as possible of legislation that, at least not punitive toward the Gulf, and highly supportive of Israel. Obviously, the more prominent members and senators have, public microphones that they can use. I would encourage them all strongly to travel there. Those visits are extremely important and well received, and then encourage economic dialogue between the region and their states or districts. And that's somewhere where members can play an extremely active role in encouraging private sector interactions. So then, in the hopes that we have a change in congressional leadership next January, to have prepared legislation that is supportive of these relationships from various angles, ready to go. Because, the new Congress is basically going to have 100 days, 3 months before 2024 just dominates the political landscape to actually get things done. So if we have that window of opportunity, we have majorities, at least in the House, hopefully in the Senate, that we can send a strong signal to the region, that help is on the way. And, you do have folks that are supportive, who understand the importance of these relationships, and there's a strong chance that 2024 will bring another shift. So I think that's the most important thing we can do this year.
Amazing. Thank you. Do you believe that the budding relationships of the Abraham Accords and all of the side deals and the security coordination can culminate in some sort of institutional structure that resembles kind of a regional NATO? I think that's the kind of the dream of everybody who's interested in the Middle East. Do you believe that this is possible?
I strongly believe it's possible. I wish I had another prop, which is we have challenge coins that we had made up in 2019 for what we refer to as MESA, or the Middle East Strategic Alliance. It was a project that was developed in the Trump administration, originally to include the GCC plus Jordan and Egypt. We had a series of meetings on counterterrorism, on energy issues, security issues, and I remember we were at a lunch at the State Department with the ambassadors of all those countries, and it was private lunch, and I said, openly to the table, the goal is to get Israel into this ultimately, and Omani ambassador looked back at me and he said, yes, it is ridiculous we are having this conversation about regional security and the Israelis aren't present. And, again, that was a great encouragement toward the Abraham Accords. But MESA is a much more elaborate structure, which has an economic and political arm to it, as well as a security arrangement that would look something like NATO. And the idea was really to build on what President Trump's views of NATO were, which have all been borne out in spades over the course of the last 3 months, but that NATO had become very sort of bloated, and that the dependence on the United States and the assumption that the United States would always ride to the rescue, always fund NATO, even when rich countries like Germany were not fulfilling their obligations, that had really sapped NATO's strength. And, it was interesting, the last NATO ministerial that I was monitoring, that President Trump attended, Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of the alliance, came out, and this is public, and said in his public remarks, we did more work in this meeting than we've done in decades at NATO. And it's because President Trump, gave us the hard love and made sure we knew that the United States was not to be taken advantage of. And that really galvanized the alliance. And it's why I actually think NATO has been as effective as it has been in the response to the Ukraine invasion. So that's very much what we envisioned for MESA, that the regional countries would take the lead, that obviously there's plenty of money to fund it. This doesn't need to be a burden on US taxpayers, but it is a major magnifier of US power. And just finally getting Israel into CENTCOM last year is a major component of this. And now we could also leverage the historic investment in Israel's security that the United States has made to provide leadership and coordination to an organization like MESA. So I think it's very possible. The groundwork has been laid. As I said, we even have challenge coins, so that's a huge deal. So it's something that's ready to go. And again, I would have that, and I would like to pass that through the United States Senate as a treaty to make it binding, and have that all ready to go for January of 2025, when hopefully we will have leadership that would appreciate such a project.
Amazing. I mean, I want to say something personally, and I'm sure that a lot of our audience agree. I'm also extremely happy to hear an actual vision. That there is a vision. It's not just about what's going on. So no, that there are people with a vision about what needs to be done and how it can be done. So thank you for this. We have a question about Qatar and Indonesia. So apparently, or there were reports that the Biden administration were working on bringing those two countries to the Abraham Accords, the normalization agreements. Do you have any insight why those efforts failed, if they were there?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't take a position on the Gulf Rift issue. Qatar is an enormously important ally of the United States militarily. Obviously, also an energy superpower, and they were extremely helpful, particularly in during the Afghanistan debacle. And they have had a much closer historically relationship with Israel because of the Qatari assistance to the Palestinians, which has led to greater coordination with the Israelis. And one of the earlier indicators of a possible normalization deal was a tweet from the lead Qatari interlocutor with the Palestinians and with the Israelis, whose name has just gone out of my head, but he's a very powerful figure on this game board. He tweeted probably in I'd say fall of 2017, because I was working with Jason and Jared on the peace process thing then, about how support for Israel and about how Israel wasn't the problem in the region. And I remember taking it into Jason Greenblatt's office and being like, wow, this is a big deal. And Jason said, yeah, this is a big deal. So the Qataris, have always been in a slightly different position. I've asked them directly. They've said they don't feel like they need to do it right now, that things are kind of happening. Indonesia, I've been less close to, but there are so many reasons that makes sense for Indonesia. And, it would be, I think, a great step forward for that extremely important country. And, I can't tell you why the Biden administration didn't pursue it. I would go back to the lack of credibility. If you don't feel like you can really be trusted, or you can't really trust the United States, it's a hard leap to take. And so I would say that would be something, a future administration should look at immediately. And if there is progress to be made there, get those deals done.
Thank you. There is a question about actually Abraham Accords countries. So why, if the relationship is so good between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain, why do those countries still vote against Israel in the UN?
Again, a very interesting question. There has been some signs of shifting there. It's not as reflexive as it has been. I would say it is an indication of what is extremely wrong with the United Nations as an organization writ large. These are old habits, and it would take concerted US pressure and the demand signal that this is really important to us, that you knock this off. And I just don't think it's coming from this administration. I don't think they take that as a priority. Obviously, under Ambassador Haley and President Trump, it was a major priority. And if she were back in her seat in Turtle Bay, I'm sure she would be, reading them the Riot Act as nicely as possible and with a South Carolina accent, but reading them the Riot Act that this had to come to an end, and they were no longer going to have this kind of double world where they can stand up for the Palestinians at the UN, but be doing deals with the Israelis outside the UN. So I think that can be dealt with, but it'll take our engagement to get it to happen.
Amazing. There are questions actually about Egypt. So Egypt had a cold peace for 40 years. And now we saw Sameh Shoukry, the Egyptian foreign minister, go into Sde with everybody. Do you know if Egypt is now willing to match the risk of, or the Abraham Accords in any way, or are they still trying to walk the tight line between having traditional support for the Palestinians and diplomatic relations with Israel?
No, I think that situation is changing as well. And interestingly, in many ways focused on energy. And Egypt played the leadership role in convening the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum in January of 2018, might have been 19. That it brings together Egypt, Israel, the Palestinians have a seat at the table, but then also Italy, Cyprus, Greece, and Jordan to collectively manage the energy assets in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that's really led to a lot of interesting developments. I had a dinner with the Egyptian Petroleum Minister, Al-Molla, 2 years ago, and another one about 3 months ago, and got his views. And he always said that he felt that in terms of security, the vision of President Sadat had been realized from the 79 treaty, but that Sadat also had a vision of economic cooperation that would be so beneficial to Egyptians, and that had not been realized, but that it had started. And so I think you look at Al-Molla's visit to Jerusalem this time last year, which was a very big deal. Then the deals that came out of that, specifically for the export of Israeli gas through the pipelines to the Egyptian natural gas export facilities at Alexandria, a huge deal. And those had been shuttered for years. And now he told me when I saw him before Christmas that they were at full capacity. So really a crucial way that, Israeli supply through Egyptian facilities can help us ease the current energy crisis. Another deeply unfortunate Biden administration policy was the announcement that they would cease any participation by the United States or any advocacy on the behalf of US companies for any foreign fossil fuel project. So, our private companies can get involved in that, but without the support of the government or the advocacy of the Commerce Department, which is a real hamper, a deterrent for our participating in those projects, but very important that they go forward.
Amazing. I'm going to take a prerogative questions. It seems that there are a few policies of the Biden administration that many of us agree to qualify them with the adjective of unfortunate. I want to ask you your professional opinion. What do you think the problem is? What is exactly the flawed assumptions of a big part of the foreign policy establishment that keeps churning out suboptimal policies in this way?
It's hard. I mean, it just seems to me detached from reality, that they see the world as they want it to be. And in the world that they want to see, climate is the driving priority of the administration. They put policies on day one. That's the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline that everyone talks about, but there are a whole host of other things that they have done, including they haven't put out a national security strategy per se, but they've put out a climate security strategy about how climate concerns are going to drive their national security policy. And in that world, China is a partner. They're a partner on climate issues. In that world, you want to get away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. You want to punish that industry because you think that that's going to spur the transition to renewables or all.
Well, I hope her connection recovers shortly.
Yeah.
I apologize to all our
right.
listeners and audience.
Right. While we're waiting for Victoria to come back, I just would like to say something about Qatar. I think our relationship with Qatar and treating Qatar as a major ally is somewhat problematic because they are still one of the world's leading funders of Islamist terrorism. And, while we all want to see everyone coming under the tent of the Abraham Accords, I think there has to be some conditionality, and we have to be careful. I know politics makes for strange bedfellows, but sometimes, as the old expression goes, don't be shocked if when you lie down with dogs, you might wake up being somewhat itchy. So, Qatar is problematic, and I'm hoping that Victoria's connection comes back. I want to find out the strength of the Eastern Mediterranean pipeline, and certainly Victoria would know more about this than anyone else. So we're waiting. Okay. So as we're waiting, Hussein, you have a great deal to add in terms of the revolutions that are going on within some of our Gulf Sunni Arab allies. Would you like to talk about this aside from the glue that is adhering Israel and these allies together with the threat of Iran? There are other wonderful things, developments that you know about.
If everybody with sound thinking about the Middle East for the past 2 decades, since 9/11, knew that the problems of the Middle East do have profound and deep cultural and religious dimensions. And those were very impactful and very meaningful to understand developments in the Middle East, and they were very important for our policy and understanding Middle Eastern politics and our own approach. And unfortunately, this understanding have completely eroded almost from all of our establishments and institutions. But the people who remember a lot of these conversations do remember that those conversations used to exist. This view is absolutely true. And regardless if we quite understand exactly the nature of those religious problems and cultural problems or what to do about them, their own presence or existence is real. What we are seeing in some of the most important Arab ruling elites and families in the Middle East, that this understanding is also dawning on them. They are starting to act in a way that actually transcends politics. They are still in power. They are rulers. They do have political interests that they are working with all the time, but they actually understood, a lot of them understood that this it transcends politics. This is in part why a lot of these developments that Victoria talked about are completely missed from the analytical bodies, or missed on the analytical bodies in foreign policy in the United States, because they don't think this way. They don't understand culture. You can't explain the importance of culture to those who lack, a basic understanding of culture. So there are major developments happening in religious institutions and cultural institutions. They are happening openly, while the conversations about them are not so open. So there are candid and open conversations about this nature of shifts that the region needs in terms of the conception of the self-identity of many nations in the region, and the understanding of the religious tradition and of the religious identity. And this is a historical development, truly, in world history, and it's I hope it really continues. I mean, there are a lot of constraints. I don't want to sell, this is a development that's happening, and hopefully it does fruit in the historical changes that we need to see in the region. And if there is one question or one request that I can ask from a lot of people, since 9/11, we've been, a lot of us been shouting from the rooftops, Islam needs a reformation. There's a major problem in Muslim societies and Muslim cultures. I want you to also be able to realize and see it when actually it starts happening. Don't say, oh, how could they do that? There is no way to reform. No, I want you to recognize it's possible. Victoria is back, I can see.
Yay. All right.
I don't know what happened.
Okay, Victoria, I'm so sorry that we're so dependent on technology, but we're very, very glad to have you back. Are there other questions that have been coming in, Hussein?
There are a couple. I know that we don't have time for all of them, but there's a question about Turkey. If you have any insights about this very interesting country that's called Turkey. Erdogan, not too long ago, was the caliphate, the lost caliphate caliph found. He was the defender of Palestine and Al-Quds of Jerusalem. He spoke very, very openly against the Abraham Accords and demonized those Gulf countries. And all of a sudden, he has this royal reception for the Israeli President Herzog in Ankara. What's happening? And if you know, what are the modifications are happening in the Turkish strategy and Turkish policy, and to what extent are they reliable and credible at this point?
Actually, that it goes to the answer that I had that was interrupted, which is, I think, mugged by reality. If you look at the progress of the Turkish lira, when I was last there in October of 19, you could buy 3 lira for $1. It's gotten up as high as 15. So that currency has just tremendous pressure on it. Erdogan is facing his first really credible political opposition in years. And I think he has realized that particularly a friendship or rapprochement with Russia is not a great thing for Turkey. Turkey is a NATO ally. Most people don't know this, but there is no mechanism to kick Turkey out of NATO. Turkey has to agree to withdraw. There's nothing the other member states can do. So we are in a way stuck with that, but it also can be an advantage because of Turkey's remarkable location, the historic friendship between our people. I would like nothing more than for this to be a legitimate rapprochement, that Erdogan is understanding the error of his ways, that he stops his regional meddling in places like Libya, and we can get back to a much more productive place. But I'm going to take a wait and see approach to that.
Amazing. Well, I'm gonna make the last question mine. We talked about reality a lot. Is it possible? And if so, when do you think this is possible to happen? That finally the Palestinians themselves will be mugged by reality?
I mean, again, nothing could make me happier. And one of the points I tried to make to the Palestinians directly before the Abraham Accords were reached was that this was their moment of greatest leverage, that everybody knew that
that the Gulf wanted to normalize with Israel. And at that point, the Palestinians still had a veto over that. And so, I mean, I would say to them, look, President Trump expects you to negotiate a good deal, that a deal that you feel you can sustain. He's a deal maker. He understands that. And you have something everybody wants. But I mean, I don't know that that's going to be the case in a year or so. And as it turned out, they never got to play that card because they wouldn't. And so once again, never missing the opportunity to miss an opportunity. My hope would be going forward that with the new generation of Palestinians who are so discontent with the hand that they've been dealt and with their leadership. I mean, the only thing that's less popular than President Abbas, I guess, is Pidge. But, that it doesn't have to be this way. There's no reason Gaza can't be an enormously productive space for the Palestinians. And, there is no reason there can't be more interaction between the Israelis and Palestinians if they will just get into a new mindset in which the eradication of Israel is not a possibility. It sort of goes back to Jabotinsky. And, if they think Israel can be eradicated, that's plan A, and they won't negotiate plan B. If they accept that's not possible, then they might be willing to talk about plan B. And I think that's the mindset we have to get them into. That's where the Trump policies toward Israel were so helpful, in that they made clear that the United States wasn't going to allow for all this doublespeak. Where's Jerusalem? Can't find it on a map. No, it's the capital of Israel. It is in Israel. The Golan Heights are part of Israel. And once you make clear to them that this notion, that the Arabs are going to ride to their rescue and eradicate Israel, and they're going to have Palestine from the river to the sea, that's a lie, then hopefully they can get to a place where a better future can be built for the Palestinian people, because what has been done to them by their own leadership over the last 70 years is nothing short of criminal.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It has been an absolute pleasure to listen to you and to actually inject a note of optimism. When you deal in the Middle East 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it can be quite depressing right now. And you have been like this harbinger of spring, a breath of fresh air. Thank you. We are going to take 1 week's break because of the holidays, and our next webinar will be on the 27th, Wednesday the 27th, with Dr. Raphael Medoff, who is the founder and director of the David S. Wyman Institute of Holocaust Studies, because of Yom HaShoah, the commemoration of the Holocaust, to find out what it was that the major media and the State Department knew and didn't know during the Holocaust about what was happening to the Jews throughout Europe. And I want to take this opportunity to thank our wonderful audience, and especially to thank you, Victoria. I hope that you will be part of the next administration, please God, because you have so much to offer. And I want to wish everyone a happy Easter, a Chag Pesach Sameach, and especially to our wonderful moderate Muslim friends, Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you so much. And I was just reminded, please, we depend on our listeners for your support in order to bring these wonderful webinars to you. So if you would like to make a contribution to Amit, we greatly appreciate it. So please go to www.amit.online.org to make a contribution. Thank you very, very much.